Welcome to the Arena Decklist Podcast. I'm Gerry Thompson, joined by professional podcaster Brian Gottlieb, and we have some Modern to talk about for sure. But first, because for some reason I feel like maybe we don't get like a full 60 minutes out of just the Modern stuff, we have some other stuff to talk about, Brian. Like, I don't know how you did 37 podcasts this week.
Yeah, it's funny that you refer to me as a professional podcaster now, but like I previously was a professional podcaster, I think, and now I would say I'm not. So actually, I'm less of a professional podcaster than I've ever been over the last 4 years. But the output is high, though. That's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, was part of that when you started with me, or was that talking about like the First Strike days?
No, I would say at some point in like our Arena Decklist history, we were both professional podcasters. Like I think that was the core of what we did. And sure, we did, some other media as well, some YouTube and do some writing and some broadcasting. But I mostly thought of myself as a podcaster first.
Either way,
I even had 2 regular podcasts for a while.
Yeah, I mean, either way, you were talking for a living, or at the very least, using words for a living. So,
yeah,
whatever that amounts to, I guess. But what did you all do this week? Was it just all Fab stuff?
Yeah, all Fab stuff. 3 different Flesh and Blood casts. Part of it, we dropped our newest set. It was in pre-release this weekend. The official release is tomorrow. We're recording this on Thursday, so it'll officially release on Friday. So everyone's real excited. Lots of questions about the design. And this is the first set where I have like a full design credit for. The other one, it was more of a consulting role. So this one, in
a big way too, right?
Yeah. It was, I can share. I was always unsure about sharing this, but it's now out there on a credits page. Our design team is 2 people. It's me and James White, the creator of Flesh and Blood. So it's impossible for my hands not to be all over this set. And we came up with something really cool, I think, really exciting. And it seems like the Flesh and Blood community is really loving it. So it's been exciting.
Hell yeah. Are any of these podcast things that I could listen to if like I know you and I don't know, you know the scope of our Fab conversations, right? Like is it too much in the weeds in a lot of this stuff for like card names and mechanics and stuff? Or
I don't think so. I think in particular, if you went and found the Pitch Perfect podcast, which is one of the first ones that it actually came out last week. But I talked to 2 of the awesome female content creators we have in the Flesh and Blood space, Elaine and Melody. And we talked very generally about like the design of Outsiders and my background and stuff like that, which I'm sure that is not interesting to you at this point. You've basically lived my background for an extended period of time.
Yeah, but I still like hearing you talk about it, Yeah,
and they were also just like such fun interviewers, and it was just a good vibe for that conversation. But I also was on with my friend Red Zone Rogue over on his channel and his podcast, Living Legends podcast. I hopped on with my buddy Flake over on the Instant Speed podcast. So I've just been all over the Flesh and Blood world.
Pitch Perfect podcast.
And I will say, I as much as I love them, their optimization for SEO is not great.
No, check this out.
Did you find it immediately?
So I'm on Pocket Casts.
Okay.
And I just typed in Pitch Perfect.
Yeah.
The first thing that comes up is one called Near Perfect Pitch. And then the second one is Pitch Perfect Pod, and it is their podcast.
Oh, great. Yeah, nice easy find there. So when I was looking for it, I was looking for it on YouTube, which I could see being a harder spot to find Pitch Perfect for sure.
Yeah. Easy game.
Yeah, and it's just been fun to tell the behind the scenes stories. I've watched like Mark Rosewater do it for years, and it always fascinated me too. I think like we all as Magic players appreciate that look behind the curtains. And when I was put in a position to do that, I really wanted to give a lot to players. I wanted them to feel connected to the process and understand our thinking and just, do as good of a job as Mark did and he's made himself so available for so many years. Right. Yeah. And the least I could do is pay it forward in some way to the Flesh and Blood community. So
were you thinking when you started going through this process, like, oh, I should, document this in some way, or at least make mental notes, because this is going to make for a good anecdote,
I thought
5 years down the line.
Yeah, I maybe thought about it, but I don't have the time to do, like, it's just not going. I can't prioritize like telling a good story about the creation over the creation itself, and any kind of like cataloging necessarily cuts into like design time. So it did cross my mind, and occasionally like something will occur to me like, oh, this is a really interesting point in the development of this set, and I should tell the story of it sometime. But no like specific note taking or story crafting went into,
like, mental note taking though.
Yeah, maybe a little mental note taking. Yeah,
cool. Yeah, because I think the fact that you have been involved in Magic, and that getting those kind of like backstory things about like, how the hell did Batterskull get printed, or what, those sorts of things are like super interesting. And then
yeah,
from my experience going through the design steps, it's so small ball, the amount of like iteration that you do. You're just like tweaking a number or a word like here and there, and it doesn't seem like a big deal at the time. But if it goes from like start to finish, then it does look like a much bigger deal.
yeah.
And then you're just like, oh, well, like, actually this story that took place over the span of 4 months or whatever is actually pretty good. And I wonder if this is ever going to come out someday. Who knows?
Yeah, some days it feels like your job is just like changing 2s to 3s all day, right? Like that's all you're actually doing. But then you look at like the cumulative effect of getting all your 2s and 3s right, and then not downplaying the tons of other things that go into it. There actually is a pretty interesting story there. So
yeah, I was thinking about some of this stuff the other day where, I don't know, just like working on cons, and how through a lot of it, Teamer was the best and Abzan was the mopey, clunky, kind of like garbagey color combination, but it had good cards and, Thoughtseize and Hero's Downfall and stuff. So it's like, maybe it'll just get like propped up on power or whatever. And then like a lot of stuff changed at the end.
yeah.
And it's just like, man, like some of the Teamer stuff got nerfed. A lot of the Abzan cards got buffed, like notably Siege Rhino. But I also think that Abzan Charm kind of got pinpointed to a more specific removal mode or whatever.
Yep.
And it just like the result of all these small changes is just a complete 180 on how we saw things. So
it's funny how that works, right? Like you only have to add like a point of power here, a point of toughness there, and then all of a sudden, the entire standard format can be turned on its ear because of the ripple effects. So
yeah, and then just at some point you have to hit submit on the stuff, right? It's pencils down.
Yep.
So you could just keep iterating for forever. So yeah, I like listening to that stuff, even if I don't know the specifics, but maybe one day I'll learn the specifics. I guess we do have Fab Pro Tour at end of April, right? So I'll see
end of
you
April.
then.
Yeah, you're gonna come down, hang out in Baltimore, and I would love to see other Magic players that I've gotten to know throughout the years come down. And I see more and more folks dip their toes all the time. Collins Mullen just did really well at a Flesh and Blood tournament. It's kind of the first time I saw his name around things. So
awesome.
Yeah, he's obviously getting involved, and I see new faces all the time. So, and the other thing too, I'd emphasize is that I think Outsiders is just like, it feels like the correct jumping off point for Magic players. And like some of that is me thinking like, well, where did this game sort of let me down when I was trying to discover it? Like, what did I want out of it as an experienced card gamer? How could we have better set up the new player experience? And all of that has been informing, particularly like the intro products we did around this set. So if you have been torn up until this point, go get the Outsiders Blitz decks. I designed them. There's 6 different ones, 6 different heroes, and they play really well against each other. And
when are we going to talk about the intro product experience and
end of this year? End of this year. It's on the calendar to talk about.
We can't do it with just these. It would be like a very small part one. It'd be a very
small part of it, I think.
All right. Well, that's still on my calendar. I can't wait.
Yep, that'll be fun.
All right. We also have a new card from March of the
out of nowhere. I didn't know we were getting this one.
Where did this come from? Who dropped this?
I think it was just in like a tweet associated with the storytelling that's been going on around March of the Machines, which apparently people have really liked. I would
March
be honest,
of the Machine.
March of the Machine, singular. Sorry. I haven't read them myself, but it does seem like the story notes are hitting pretty hard with some people.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I mean, they were. Remember when the cards were showing up through tweets from like the main account, and we were just
Yep.
like, why are these in like arena mode or whatever?
Yeah.
So I remember that happening. So yeah, this is not a surprise. Anyway, we can talk about this real quick. Archangel Elspeth, 2 dub. Legendary Planeswalker Elspeth, 4 starting loyalty, +1. Create a 1/1 white soldier creature token with lifelink, -2. Put 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature. It becomes an angel in addition to its other types and gains flying. -6. Return all non-land permanents with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. My man, this is your ultimate collected company.
Yeah.
Because it's not random. It just whatever's in your graveyard.
And I can probably load up my graveyard pretty nicely. You know, I've seen some sentiment around this card. The first impressions were like pretty medium of it.
Yeah.
I think this card is very strong, actually. I'm surprised to see people as soft on it as they are for a few reasons. Like,
first, okay. Are you going to make the comparison
to the original Elspeth?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think you even have to make the comparison. Like, very obviously, it does track hard to that original Elspeth. But I think this card just stands on its own, honestly. I don't think you need to go there with it. But if you want to, like, yeah, +1, make a soldier. In this case, you get a little lifelink.
Yeah, with lifelink, which then obviously plays well with the -2.
Yeah, and you make your permanently flying creature, right? Which is very different from the original Elspeth. Was Correct. It +3/3 on the original Elspeth, though?
It was.
Yeah, okay. But still, permanent 2/2, very nice. Permanent flying, extremely nice.
And they're both pluses as well. So
yeah, that is different for sure. But I think the buff is so significant here and so much stronger. But what really actually entices me here is the -6.
Because, it's powerful.
Yeah, like game-winning powerful if you want it to be. And that is really exciting because this comes fast, right? Just plus immediate blocker ready to go. And it's not like you have to play fair around this ability. You can go ahead and stock up your graveyard in whatever way you want to go ahead and do that with these mana value 3 options. Load it up, with your comes into play triggers, I'm not saying this is like a modern or pioneer, or I guess not pioneer, but a modern card like Reflector Mages and things like that, where you are getting immediate value off of it. It's pretty easy to find options like that in standard and just go off with this -6, but you don't have to, right? Like it's just there as an extra bonus. While if you have a deck filled with 1, 2, and 3 cost permanents that you're like trying to attack with or trying to play a more mid-rangey game with, think just like classic green-white mid-range decks. You can even look at like the toxic decks. I think that's a fine place to sort of take a first pass at Archangel Elspeth. I think if you just are playing a game, you will get enough value out of the +1 and -2, where sometimes -6 can just steal your game out of nowhere. And that's pretty exciting for an offensive-based Planeswalker.
Yeah, I do think that this compares favorably to the original Elspeth, but I think it is pretty obviously to see that original Elspeth has also just been kind of outmoded.
Oh, absolutely.
It sort of used to be like the de facto mid-range breaker in modern, like way back in the day, right? It's just so hard to kill at the time, like, 4 mana permanent when Abrupt Decay was like the biggest removal. Yeah. There wasn't a lot of direct destroy Planeswalker type of stuff, and then just like a 1/1 got in front of a Tarmogoyf, It was just like a lot of weird things, and now it's just like, well, there's a lot of extra damage and unholy heat type of stuff and haze creatures and everything hits Planeswalkers, but like I do still feel like this is relatively solid. It just might not go back to like actual modern, but like speaking in the context of Pioneer and stuff like historic, I mean, not that this slides super well into like the angel theme, even though it says angel on the card, but like there are the angel decks that could benefit from like all of these abilities basically. But from my experience playing those decks too, the Planeswalker that they played was like the Ajani life gain one that just like blowed up the board for, matchups that got kind of out of control, like the mirror match and stuff. So like this doesn't necessarily solve any problems that they have specifically, but smaller creature decks I do feel like could take advantage of this, but then a lot of those decks play Thalia and stuff. So I don't know, but some of the legendary decks in standard could utilize this pretty well, or mono white mid-rangey type of things. Like the lifelink clause, I think is pretty nice. Just being able to like grow a big lifelinker from this one card is going to be undervalued, I think. So,
what do you think about how this card compares to the Wandering Emperor?
Emperor's more versatile, I guess.
Yeah, that seems reasonable. I think there is an opportunity for Archangel Elspeth to actually shine brighter in some shells, whereas, like you said, Wandering Emperor is just kind of good cards, like good card that does good stuffs. Whereas Archangel Elspeth is much more capable of empowering an archetype and maybe even making an archetype, like giving an archetype what it needs to compete. Yeah. That seems plausible to me. Whereas you can just sort of put the Wandering Emperor anywhere and it's going to be just fine.
Yeah, I think this card is solid. It'd be like a card that I would not be shocked if it sees play, but it's probably not going to make a top 10 list.
Yeah, it's always hard to say that, but that seems reasonable to me.
Given the last few sets and where the power level has been, I don't think it is going to make any top 10 lists. Obviously, there were some sets where we're just like, I got 4, you know?
Yep. Yeah, power level definitely on its way back up now, it feels like. So,
which is cool. I think a lot of people have said this too, that like Standard's just in a really good place right now.
It is. And I think we've been saying that for a while now. And our only complaint about Standard is like, can there be more Standard? Yeah.
Right. So I think that they've been doing a good job of increasing power level, making the sets exciting for a lot of different people, and still being able to balance Standard. But then again, there haven't been a ton of eyes on Standard. So maybe it's irresponsible to say that, you know, the format, even if you distilled it down and broke it and everything, that it would still be in a good place. But right now, when people are just kind of playing it casually, it does look really good. Yeah.
It's always a question, right? Like Legacy succeeded for years because it was being played casually. And then when you actually delve into it, it was a very, very broken format and took some massaging till it got to a very good place. And then it got blown up again. So,
man, did you ever play what was the name of this? It was a fake Moto format. It was like Vintage before they had power.
Yeah. It was Classic. It was called Classic, right?
It was Classic. Okay.
Yeah. I played that.
That format is, I don't know, what you just said about Legacy just reminded me of that format too, where it was like people could kind of like play that casually and it seemed fine, but then for whatever reason, I had this friend who was pretty spiky and try hardy, but didn't really compete in real life. Just, you know, had other stuff going on or whatever, but he played a lot of Moto. And so he was like this shark coming into the casual waters and ended up building a couple decks that just like destroyed the format. And I got to play one of those decks at some point, which was like a Necropotent Psychotog deck or whatever, you know, just nonsense. I think like Gush was in there probably.
Mystical Tutor, maybe.
Maybe, but I hate Mystical Tutor, so I don't know that I would have played it. But,
look, you can hate Mystical Tutor all you want. There's no question. Like that was the outlier in Legacy when people started paying attention to that format, and it very quickly degenerated the format.
There were some cards that got printed too. Wasn't it just like Entomb got printed? Or not Entomb, but there was something.
No, it wasn't Entomb. Like it was like Reanimator that first broke Mystical, like put it most clearly in the crosshairs and facilitated a ban. But I don't remember. Maybe it was just a good reanimation target. It might have been like Iona, possibly.
Maybe. I don't know. I know that I played Reanimator a bunch once that list kind of popped up. And
it was very good.
Just with 0 games played, I immediately got second in one of the opens, and it was one of the most fun tournaments I've played in my life.
Oh, when you get to play on easy mode and everyone else is playing on hard mode, there's few better feelings.
Yeah, and then I got killed by Storm in the finals, like turn 1 through a Thoughtseize or something. So, you know, they were also not messing around.
Yep.
Anyway, got your reinvigorated podcast career back on track. We got a new Magic the Gathering card. Anything else before we try and fill how much time we got left? Yeah, like 40 minutes talking about one modern deck.
Well, I can again ask for prayers as I head out to Auckland in 2 days.
Oh, God.
last time those prayers only got me on the flight to nowhere. So I don't know if like the prayers of our listeners are actually cursed and I should not be requesting them. But whatever deity or faith you would like to, put in a good word with for me as I get ready to again board what is supposed to be a 17-hour flight. But who knows how many hours it will ultimately be.
It's supposed to be a 17-hour flight, and it's supposed to land you in Auckland, New Zealand.
Yes, these are the general, expected operating parameters of this flight.
Hopefully it's not 20 hours and lands you back in JFK.
In New York. Yeah. Well, we'll see. We will see.
It can't get much worse, right?
No, it can't. It really just cannot. I guess I could die in a plane crash. Like, we'll put that out there into the universe. Totally possible. But
might be less torturous though.
It would be faster, that's for sure.
Yeah. So at least you got that going for you. But
yep.
What's the weather like? How are the volcanoes? How are the floods?
Everything's good. You're very volcano concerned when it comes to Auckland, but it doesn't seem to be something that affects the people there all that much.
I added that to the list of things that were potential concerns because my friend mentioned it to me because he made it seem like it was a big deal.
Well, like there are volcanoes there and there have been volcanic eruptions. And at some point there could be, a catastrophic volcanic eruption. That's within the realm of possibility, but that is true of like many places on Earth. Like, Pacific Northwest is very subject to a huge volcanic eruption at some point. So there's no immediate fear of eruption that I am aware of. Whether there looks good this go around, like, high 60s, low 70s, sitting right in that sweet spot. They're kind of coming to their end of their summer now. So it'll be nice to get away from the weather here in upstate New York and maybe get a little bit more sunshine as I'm down there.
Do you get to go outside? Do you go on walks?
I go on walks. Last time I walked to work every day, which
nice.
I really like. This time I'm a little bit further away, but I'm staying down by the waterfront. So, I imagine I'll head out and take in meals by the harbor and walk around a bit and do all that good stuff. So,
okay. No, all that sounds great.
Yeah, it should be good.
Okay. Modern deck.
Your modern deck that you teased weeks ago, finally paying off.
Well, I don't know if it's paying off because I was going to wait until I had actually played it in a tournament, and I had that scheduled for last weekend. And that just did not happen because I'm kind of tilted, I guess. I'm going to go on a little rant here.
Okay, I'll allow it.
I remember, and I'm like tilted, but I also want to preface this with like, I understand the way, the reason that things are the way they are or whatever. And I should not be tilted by this. It's just a matter of, I remember how things used to be better and they are not as convenient, at least for me personally. So I'm somewhat miffed. That is okay. So, old man yelling at clouds. Back in my day, used to be able to go to a website and go through and get your list of cards together and submit your order and probably have it within a week. And they probably had most things in stock. If not, you went to like your secondary or like tertiary option to like fill out the order for the odds and ends that the main website did not have. Right.
Mm-hmm.
That is just no longer the case. You can just not do that in a lot of different ways. And I
like anywhere, there's no options where you can realistically do that any longer.
So I've been trying to not give SCG my business for a couple different reasons.
Yeah.
And that meant that I was doing more stuff on TCG Player, but I was also buying fewer Magic cards in general. So it was, not that annoying of a process or whatever. And usually when I was doing TCG Player stuff, it was like, oh, engineered explosives is $4 in real life and it's now 15 on Moto. They're probably going to go up in real life. So I'll just like buy out TCG Players engineered explosives. So I'm just looking at one card, right?
Yeah.
And that was pretty easy. Now I'm like, oh, well, I want to put together like this modern deck and this modern deck and this Pioneer deck and maybe buy some odds and ends for standard if there's ever a standard tournament, right? So I have this list of maybe 40 different cards and it's like Rune of Sustenance, type of crap.
Yeah.
And then, you know, some of the expensive stuff like Fables and Underworld Breaches and things like that. And going through that process on TCG Player is kind of a nightmare when like every seller has one and then they list like the price and say, you know, Breach is $20, but $20 at this vendor and then like 22 at this vendor, but like the first one shipping is $5 inexplicably and the next one is like $1. And it's just like they don't show you the actual, it doesn't sort by like total cost of the thing or, you know, it's kind of a nightmare.
No, it does sort by total cost, I think, by default.
Sure, but okay, so then it's like...
But it's not telling you how it's allocated.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then if you're like, well, if I wanted to buy 4 of this, then actually this vendor is cheaper.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just kind of a nightmare. And then they have their whole like quote unquote cart optimization thing.
That doesn't work. Don't touch that button.
Yeah,
ever.
I learned both through trial and error and also through talking to some people where it's just like, oh yeah, don't do that.
Yep.
And then I did order some cards at first and gave myself 2 weeks time. I thought that was plenty of time. And the shipping said, I think it was like 5 to 12 days or something. And it's like, yeah, that's fine. That's completely reasonable, right? And for a lot of sellers that was, and not all of them, I guess. I still have one order that I just checked the other day that the label got printed on the 9th and they still have not sent my order. It's now the 23rd.
Yep.
And it's just like, what the hell? Like when I was selling stuff on eBay, I was trying to get stuff in the mail literally the next day because I felt like, I don't know, that was just kind of like my job. And also I wanted good feedback and whatnot. And this is just not how people roll these days.
Well, I think feedback has been de-emphasized in the process, right? It's become less important because as long as you're above a certain threshold, you're going to meet TCG requirements and be listed, and that's all you really need. I'll tell you the way I engage with TCG, and I should say the way I engaged with TCG because I would just rather, well, I would also rather not at this point. Like I just don't really want to use their platform anymore, but things are sort of approaching a monopoly for TCG. And by TCG, I mean like actually eBay, because eBay owns TCG and they own what was Channel Fireball or Card Shop Live. And it's all just become this one mush of stuff. And even if you try to go to like an independent, like third party seller, I didn't know this. I was actually just talking with some folks who were on the store side the other day. Like they're all using the Binder POS system, which is owned by TCG Player anyway. So anything you do in this space now just eventually gets routed through TCG Player.
Yeah.
Which, you know, I wish there were alternatives, but I don't see them right now. But anyway, if I were to engage via like the main TCG Player site, the way I did it, and this was for mostly Flesh and Blood cards, so I assume, and I know there is, because I've certainly purchased enough Magic cards in the past. You find the retailer you like, that you can count on, that ships in the fashion you appreciate.
I'm still looking.
Yeah, you know, I used MTG Mint card on TCG Player a lot. I liked their service, and their prices were like a little bit higher than everyone else's, but they were extremely fast. They were, well packaged, things like that. And the main thing is that they had almost everything in stock. That's the thing where I just like want to find everything.
Dude, I just want to remove stairs.
Yep. And I've found Flesh and Blood sellers that are very much in the same vein where they just do everything well. They're fast. They have everything. And I just go to them and pay them like whatever the extra cost is. And I think if I were trying to like launch a business in this vein, that would be my model. Like I would just hit it out of the park, be $2 more expensive than everyone else, but just be like, look, you will always get your stuff promptly. It'll be well packaged. Any issues, we'll take care of it. And that's how I would look to make my name. And I think that's how you make sustainable space on these platforms and really carve out a niche for yourself. But you do have to find them. And there's no tools or cheat codes for finding them. You just have to like try everyone.
Yeah. So problem that I failed to list, but is kind of an issue, is that like a lot of the sellers have like one copy of a lot of the things.
Yep.
So that was sort of what I was getting at with like, this one has it at 20, but $2 shipping, or, 22 and $5 ship, whatever. And then, you find the people that do have like 4 copies and it's 10 or 20% more expensive. And it just got so frustrating, especially after like the cart optimization thing just like wiped out my order that I'd spent like an hour putting together or whatever, where it's just like, okay, F this, I'll check Star City. Because that used to be their MO, right? It was like they had the stuff.
Yeah,
it was a
more
little bit
expensive,
more expensive,
but we have everything and it's easy and you get good customer service. Yeah, that was 100% their bag.
And their thing for a while, like the last few years, has just been like they don't have everything anymore. And part of the problem with that is like, from me being in-house, is like they have a lot of the inventory. And I bet like if they got through all of their inventory, that they would have most, if not all things. The problem is that like it just takes a ton of manpower to go through all of that stuff and list it all. Right? So
do you think that's still like, given the volume of product that is now being produced, do you still think they just like have absolutely everything and can't get through? I mean, like certainly that would compound the problem of getting through everything, but also can you actually just afford to have that much of your net worth tied up in inventory?
For them, it's a sunk cost at this point.
Yeah, I guess you're committed to the idea, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's not like...
But I have to, I don't know this. I have to imagine their business is down, ? I mean, like, I know Magic is going through this boom, but they have to be so much further down the list of like first stops for a Magic player than they were at some point where they were like the stop.
Here's what I think. I think that it is not worth the time and effort and bandwidth for them to get literally everything up on the website, because they were doing enough volume with what they had listed. And so your options then are like, do we commit more resources to get through all of this stuff and to fill the stuff that is sold out when that stuff may or may not actually sell? Or do we just devote those resources to the things that are currently making money and we know are making us money, which is basically just like opening new product and listing that stuff?
Yeah. Or does this sure sound like something that works until it doesn't and is the result of crumbling infrastructure?
Yeah. I mean, at some point...
Check those off on my contract for this week, by the way.
Yeah. At some point, you get, more and more things that are sold out on the website, and sooner rather than later, you're just going to only have like half the stuff up instead of the 80% or whatever that they have now, right? And then it becomes like an even bigger problem and even tougher to fulfill. But I think that, they might have taken a hit overall because, competitive Magic is down, and even like a lot of the Commander staple-y stuff, like they just don't have in stock. So it's like, even if people wanted to buy it and they want to go to Star City to buy it, they just literally don't have it for sale. So like, what the hell are you going to do? But I think the business for them now is just selling new stuff, and that is going well. So I don't know that they're making the same amount of money or whatever, but I mean, they're still doing well enough to run a business and at least for now, not get bought out by TCG Player.
They've certainly laid off a lot of people, including both of us, many of our friends. So, I mean, I don't know.
Dude, that I understand. When COVID started, March 2020, what did I say? I thought we were going to be out of a job in 6 months.
Yeah, made it a little longer than that. I do think they tried. This isn't me dragging them. I think they tried really hard for a long time.
No, I know. This is the positive for them, is that Pete did not want to lay off anyone as a result of this.
Yeah.
But the content portion of the website was definitely not making money because there were no tournaments. There was no demand for competitive content.
And it certainly hasn't come back. Like maybe a little bit, but not what it was.
Right. And it's more specified, right? Like people are more likely to just drop $5 on a Patreon here and there for a sideboarding guide than they are to pay whatever it is, $15 a month for a monthly subscription. And the thing, I think we've probably gone through this before, but like the thing that frustrated me about the Star City stuff in general was that like we all knew this was an issue. We talked about it and no one tried to fix it. No one tried to offer like a different content model or content plan or business model as far as like what you get with subscriptions or changing the fee or whatever. It was just like, oh, let's just keep doing the same thing, even though we know we're hemorrhaging money. And then like, oops, now it's time to lay you all off. And it's just like, yeah, obviously.
Yeah.
I just, we've tried nothing and we're all out of solutions or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of thing. So that was the frustrating part. But yeah, they did keep us on for like a year longer than I thought that they would. So like kudos to them. Absolutely. But certainly the way things went down was still very frustrating. But
oh yeah.
Anyway, so I went to Star City and I went to put together a list, and some of their stuff was like 3 times more expensive than TCG Player, and they still didn't have everything. So there was like a lot of stuff that I was going to order for like future tournaments that I still haven't, that I have like carts open for all these websites. And I looked at eBay, it's more of the same, where like people aren't selling play sets of things. It's like I could buy one from here, one from here, one from here, whatever. And that's frustrating and annoying, especially since that's kind of what I did for TCG Player. And like I have 3 Fables.
Yeah.
The 4th one just didn't get here.
So what else is realistically out there? Like there's got to be like some third party that's still trying to do the old model, be it for better or for worse.
I don't know. I mean, I looked at Card Kingdom. They've kind of had that problem for a while too, where it's just a lot of the premium stuff they're constantly sold out on. And I looked at like some of the bigger retailers, Tales of Adventure, Mint Card probably would work, but is like more expensive than I wanted to. But like, yeah, it just might be the end solution. And kind of the frustrating thing of all of this is like I was trying to move away from Japanese cards.
Yeah, but maybe it's easy to get them.
But Haruruya like somehow gets you your stuff within the week, and they almost always have everything in stock.
Pretty excited that they have taken a keen interest in Flesh and Blood. I will say, I think that'll be a big boon to folks in that region.
Yeah, no, that's cool. Anyway, I did not get to play it in my PTQ, and I think I have all the cards for my Is It deck now. No, I don't. I don't have the Minor Misstep. And I think that's it out of the things that I ordered. But I had most of the stuff for this already, so that was pretty lucky. And I guess the other thing too is like I used to have confidence that I could like go to stores and like buy stuff, and that has just not been the case either. Like
that is something I almost never had confidence. Like I was very sketched out anytime I was relying on will the store have something, but it has gotten only worse.
Yeah, I mean it was more so like when I was going to stores regularly, it was because I went to those stores all the time and knew what they were capable of providing and what they weren't. You know, it's like certainly when I was growing up playing in Minnesota, I knew like what the stores had for inventory and like what I needed to pick up. And then playing like in Seattle and going to Card Kingdom, it was pretty easy to just like even go on their website before.
Yeah, I would just order in advance, show up at that little window, and they'd have all the cards for me. It was quite nice. They did a good job at that.
Right. And sometimes they're missing something like a Tribute to Hunger or Merc Lurker or whatever. And it's like, all right, I just find a replacement. And that's fine.
Yep.
But yeah, it's just, it's not the same. Now I just go and it's just like, maybe they have half the stuff or whatever. And I just don't even get to be like picky about what version. It's just like, you know, what they have is what they have. And the price is the price. So they're just like, oh, you know, like this is $3. I just like, I don't care. Like I need the card because you're the only person here who has it. So whatever.
There's nothing I can do. Please take my money.
So anyway, man, digital is pretty convenient these days. Let me tell you.
Yeah, it certainly can be. I mean, unfortunately, Magic Online, far more convenient than anything else. Shout out to the homies at Card Hoarder, keeping us supplied. But you're right. A lot of stairs that we spent years tearing down, like just years and years making it so they wouldn't affect our experience anymore. And then they all got built back up.
Yeah. I mean, part of the problem is like, I used to buy like a case when every set came out because like standard was relevant, and then that just meant that I had everything, right? But I guess the upside to that is that I have saved thousands of dollars over the last few years, which is good because I certainly don't need all of those cards.
Yeah, I just routed all of that into Flesh and Blood. I've saved nothing.
Yeah, fair enough.
Would have been nice. Would have been nice to save.
Anyway, a few weeks ago, I think it was maybe like the 4th or the 6th. It was like beginning of March. I was like getting the itch, and I knew that PTQs were happening. and sat down, looked at the format, looked at some of the deck lists, and saw some stuff that looked pretty interesting and looked like it had potential, and was also just kind of like frustrated by some of the ways that people were building their decks, and all of that kind of combined to me like actually just sitting down, playing in some challenges and whatnot. And so Omnath or Urian gets banned, right?
Yep.
Format adjusts like a little bit. I guess like creativity was already becoming like very popular towards the end of that, and then the Rakdos, Fury, Grief, like Malakir Rebirth type of stuff started getting pretty popular too. But like other than that, there hasn't been a ton of shakeup for Modern, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started seeing these is it lists that were basically, well, it started with prowess, where they would have all the cheap prowess creatures and like some DRCs and like more burn spells, mutagenic growths, lava darts, and then a bunch of underworld breaches. And that looked pretty good to me because it wasn't quite as all in as burn. It wasn't as able to play like mid-range or control as Murktide, but it was this very good aggro deck that did have a lot of interaction that also had like this awesome late game, you know? And then started seeing some Izzet decks that kind of did that, where they would effectively just cut Murktide Regent for Underworld Breach. And those looked really, really clean to me. So my thought on it was, I mean, my thought kind of always for Modern was that Counterspell is a little clunky, like the actual card Counterspell. And drawing one a game is usually fine. Sometimes play draw matters, sometimes matchup matters. But a lot of these lists were just like, I'm going to jam 4 Counterspell and 4 Murktide Regent and 4 Iteration, you know, and it's not like these cards are bad, but it's just a lot of very clunky 2-mana cards.
Expensive
Right.
for Modern.
So a lot of my lists were like, I got to shave like a Murktide, maybe shave a Counterspell and try and make up for that with maybe like some more 1-mana interaction or even like 0-mana interaction, right? Like playing a subtlety main deck or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you start looking at these breach decks, I don't know, it's just like Counterspell and breach sort of have the same issue too, where like even on your breach turns, if you're using it as kind of like this mid-game refuel, well then your Counterspell mana is down for that turn. So like any Counterspell that you find, you're not going to be able to use anyway. And the problem with it in general is if it rots in your hand, you don't have a good opportunity to actually trade that for a card, then you're just going to fall further and further behind, which then also makes the card Counterspell worse and worse because you don't have really good ways to catch up. You know, you don't have like the solitudes and stuff like that.
You need to be ahead.
Right. So I was like, all right, I'm going to take these breach lists, I'm going to streamline them. And then also like, what is the best thing that, or not even the best thing, but like, what should we be striving to do on our breach turns? Like, are we just using this to like play some lightning bolts, maybe some Mishra's Baubles, and use this as a card advantage tool? Or do we actually want to go kind of hard? And I saw some lists that were trying to go hard, where it was just like, they would still just play like a random Thassa's Oracle or a Grape Shot or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that my initial reaction was like, you can just use it as a draw spell, and to get more out of it, you probably need to be filling your graveyard a little bit more than these lists were currently doing. Because like, you know, Breach plus Bauble just by itself is pretty obscene if you have enough cards in your graveyard and you're able to keep playing the game and everything. So it's like, yeah, I think these lists are probably playing, you know, too many hard counter spells, maybe not enough things to fill their graveyard. I also think that they're just not playing enough lands. Like a lot of lists had 19 land, but with like a Fiery Island and an Otawara as if you were going to get flooded and like have no way to use your mana.
Mm-hmm.
When you're just trying to make all of your land drops because every land that you have probably translates to another spell that you can cast off Breach and stuff. And then especially if you're trying to do something where you play like some dig spells into a Grape Shot or whatever, it's like you just want all your mana. And then also for the Breach turns, you just need a lot of red mana too. So people cutting back on just straight blue-red dual lands, I was not a fan of either. So I played a league with the old lists because I was like, well, they're doing something right. I'll just try it, and just got punished by like all the things that I thought about. So then went back to the drawing board, fixed the things that I kind of talked about, went up to 20 lands, added a couple copies of Thought Scour, went down to 2 counter spells. I'm playing a Grape Shot, and I think this list is very good to the point where it's in the same vein, maybe a little weaker, but definitely similar to the like combo control decks that get to play like all the different game plans and are super threatening. So not quite Dark Depths level good, but like up there.
Oh yeah, I see it, man. Like it is very clear laid out. Like you are now in my wheelhouse, the type of decks I love to play, where you're pushing, threatening on multiple axes at the same time. You force your opponent into no-win situations, or just run over your opponent in some spots. Your stuff lines up properly. You have cheap removal, cheap disruption, cheap threats, and it just snowballs very, very quickly on your opponent. So it feels like you're interacting with all points of Modern at this juncture. I just want to read the list just so people have the full list. We're looking at 4 Ragavan, 4 Dragon's Rage Channeler, 3 Ledger Shredder, 4 Mishra's Bauble, 4 Consider, 2 Thought Scour, 4 Expressive Iteration, 3 Lightning Bolt, 4 Unholy Heat, 1 Grape Shot, 3 Underworld Breach, 2 Spell Pierce, 2 Counterspell, 4 Spire Bluff, 4 Steam Vents, 4 Scalding Tarns, 2 Flooded Strands, a Misty, a Polluted Delta, and then 3 Islands, 1 Mountain. We'll talk more about the sideboard. Let's talk about that specifically when we get there.
Sure.
So we'll leave it at 60 for now. But like, obviously, I look at this list and the differences from it existing is it Murktide stuff that's out there. It seems pretty small at first glance. Like if you were scrolling quickly through a league and this deck was there, you might scroll right past it and not even give it a second thought. How much of an evolution do you think this is from what the existing Murktide lists are doing? Because you said you think you broke Modern. So tell me why this is such a step forward from what is currently happening.
Because Murktide has cards that, when they line up, are basically exactly what you could ever want, but you have to be in those positions, in those matchups, in order to have that happen. And I mean, Murktide has been part of the metagame, has been among like the top 3 decks basically since like the deck was created, and it's taken a few different forms and gotten like some new prints here and there and stuff. Has always been able to like adapt out of the sideboard and stuff. Like it has been a constant of Modern, but it has definitely changed from like moments where it is the de facto best deck to like, you probably shouldn't play it this week because you're pretty weak to like X, Y, and Z, and those things are getting more popular. And it's not really a thing that you can easily fix, right? And I think that my deck in the aggregate is going to be stronger against a random opponent on average. And there are likely going to be specific matchups where Murktide is slightly better, at least just like in the heads up, right? It's like maybe Murktide has like a 65% matchup where I have like a 55% one or whatever. That's kind of unavoidable when your decks are different. But I think that my numbers across the board are going to be better. And certainly when you're playing the games, you are not going to feel like, just like a lot of my cards, don't do anything or don't matter here.
Sure, that all tracks. I kind of want to push you on some specific numbers and get some thoughts for you at how you arrived there.
Hit me.
3 Ledger Shredder. Did you consider just other cards in this spot? How influx were these numbers for you? Tell me about. Go ahead.
The first list that I played had Third Path Iconoclast.
Okay.
Because I guess, it with Mishra's Bauble is certainly cute and good. And it made sense when you're doing like your breach thing. You also end up with like 5 1/1s or whatever, and maybe you could do something along those lines. And it did seem playable to me, like definitely playable and solid and maybe better even in some matchups. And it was fine. It was exactly fine. Like there were some things like against core sanctifiers or sanctifiers in deck, where it was like, yeah, Iconoclast is like kind of a solution to that, and Ledger Shredder is kind of a solution to that, but like Shredder is a much cleaner, much better solution the way it played out. Whereas like sometimes you just like don't have spells. You know, like I played like these sometimes long drawn out games against Hammer where they would get me kind of low. I would stabilize. I would have, you know, my 2-1 blue and red thing. And then we would maybe get into a racing scenario. And then if I didn't draw like a solid string of spells, I would just like run out of blockers for the thing. Whereas like the Shredder just by itself blocks. And then there's also the aspect of you are maybe trying to maintain delirium against them, or at least have something that you can play out of the graveyard for breach. And then the Iconoclast gets exiled by the Sanctifier, and you actually just don't have any non-red creatures to maintain delirium. So like that was a thing that kind of mattered too. So like the fact that Shredder is blue definitely matters. The fact that it is flying matters because I don't have Murktides of my own. I don't have a ton of ways to stop them from resolving Murktide. And so if a Murktide comes down in game one, it's kind of difficult to actually kill outright or like make a bigger flyer or whatever. So a lot of times it was just like playing flyers and chump blocking and setting up for a big breach turn where either like you just double heat it or kill your opponent outright. And so having Shredder being another flyer definitely helps with that. But the big reason is just like more filtering and more ways of filling your graveyard.
I'll also say it seems to fit better with this theory, like the overarching theory of your deck where good against everything, everything's always functional. Like whereas Third Path Iconoclast relies on the texture of your draws, having other cards in hand. It just seems like Ledger Shredder is more consistent and gives you more agency over your games, which seems to be a recurring theme here.
Yeah, and also Iconoclast is weak against Ren 6 in a deck where a lot of your stuff pretty early is weak against Ren 6. Like you can make the argument that like, oh, DRC gets Delirium pretty early and like you can dash Regavan or whatever, but it's like turn 1 and turn 2, you have some really hard decisions, right? And so much of that would just be fixed with like Gitaxian Probe, right? Just like knowing whether or not they had it. Like, can I cast Ragavan turn 1 on the draw when you don't have anything else to do with your mana? And because you're on the draw, you don't know if you're actually going to have time to be able to like dash it later on. And if you just cast it and they play Ren and kill your thing, it's just the wind out of your sails even more. So
yeah, disastrous.
Adding more fuel to that fire, like playing Iconoclast into that, is so much worse than just being able to like safely play a Shredder.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. How about that cantrip suite? Why don't we talk about that for consider 2 Thought Scours? Any flex in these numbers? Again, Thought Scour is kind of the step in a more graveyard focused direction here. Did you consider higher numbers? Was there any period where you just like max cantrips to see how far you could go down this road?
I did not want to start max cantrip because I know how clunky that can be. It's just like a lot, drawing on a lot of previous experience from playing decks like this and just being able to eyeball the numbers and come to at least within like 1 or 2 cards, like what I end up feeling is the optimal number, you know? And I think a lot of this I did just eyeball, and then most if not all of it ended up being where I ended up after playing a bunch of games. And I initially thought that yes, you could go super hard on Thought Scour and have like really, really explosive breach turns, but that you also didn't need to. It was basically like, I don't want to get to turn 4, 5, 6 and then have breach and have it be anemic. So I needed like a little more help there, but I don't need a ton of help because you're still a little constrained by just the amount of mana you have total, depending on what you're trying to do. Again, like there's always Bobble where, especially like if you have a DRC in play or multiple DRCs, right? It's just like, you can just keep recasting the same Bobble to draw cards on your opponent's next upkeep. And like, if you just do that off a breach, like that is good enough a lot of the time, right? But sometimes you also want to like dig for a specific thing or like dig for an iteration or the follow-up breach for the next turn, because this is going to be like the one that you stabilize off of, but you need something to actually like put you over the hump now that you're kind of stable or whatever. So sometimes you do just actually need mana on your breach turns, and you don't necessarily need 20 cards. You just need like 10 or so. And I think 2 Thought Scour is the amount where you can put it into your deck and be able to find enough instances where you can like weave that into what you're doing to have it not feel clunky and not have it be clogging up your hand. Whereas if you go higher on that number, you're going to start seeing more hands with just like a lot of air, and Modern isn't really the format where you can just spend the early turns like spinning your wheels and like setting up again, because this deck doesn't have like a big comeback mechanism. So one of the things I considered doing was going to 19 land and playing the 3rd Thought Scour, but I don't think that you need to do that. Like 20 land is a little bit heavy at times, and it is certainly more heavy the amount that you're just like hand tripping and stuff. But I want to be able to hit every land drop. So I do think that that is important. So I don't think I would do 20 land and 3 Thought Scour. I think that that's too much.
Okay. Next card. This is a card that I'm actually a little surprised to see you include, because this is the type of thing that I know you try really hard to work out of your decks, where you look for like the leanest, most efficient version of the deck you can possibly find. And
is this the grape shot?
Yeah, you're not looking for a simple out. You're looking for, what do I actually need to win games? And that is in service of like not playing any cards which have huge deltas in their usefulness. Again, kind of going back to the overarching theory of this deck. But then here's this grape shot. So tell me how you arrived at this one of grape shot, and what does it open up for you? Like how big of a kill are you actually able to put together with this one of grape shot? Look,
man, even your Nexus deck needed a Callous Dismissal.
Yeah.
Right.
That is true. I was forced to play one of them against my will, but yeah.
It's the same deal here. It's not 100% necessary, and you see plenty of lists that are similar to mine that do not play it. I just think that you lose out a little bit by not having it in some matchups, and I think that the opportunity cost is relatively low, especially just because you get to side it out in the spots where you don't need it or want it.
Yep.
And let me just look at like the Modern decks here. So going down the list, is it Murktide? You don't need it there. Against Creativity, I'm not 100% convinced that you need it there, but it does make things a lot easier.
Sure.
Hammer, you don't need it. Rakdos, you don't need it. You actively don't want it. Rhinos is one of those decks where you can get into racing situations, have like your kind of big breach turn, and maybe not be able to stabilize all the way, because maybe you can kill their Rhinos, set up enough blockers, but maybe you're low enough that like if they top deck a burn spell, you're going to lose. And that's almost exactly the type of matchup where having the grape shot to kind of ensure that you're able to actually win the game on that turn matters enough. And the grape shot, like you're not grape shotting people for 20, because it's just like not really possible. And I've looked for ways to do that, and I don't think one exists. I did see so one of the reasons why I'm like happy to talk about this deck now, even though like I personally did not like win a PTQ with it or whatever yet, is that last weekend Demonic Tutors, who is a streamer on Twitch, usually plays Yawgmoth, but plays like a lot of Modern, got 9th and top 8 in challenges with a very similar list.
Mm-hmm.
And his first list had 2 remands instead of 2 counterspells, basically so he could play Gigantha. But like I have sideboard cards that make it so I don't want to play Gigantha. And then also had a copy of An Offer You Can't Refuse.
Mm-hmm.
And I got really confused for a moment, because I was like, wait, between like remands and like an offer, is there like some weirdo infinite that I'm not seeing or whatever, right? And
is there?
No. The answer is no.
Okay.
But the Offer You Can't Refuse, he basically played instead of a Spell Pierce, because maybe it allows you to generate mana on your breach turns, which could let you go a little bit deeper on the grape shot stuff, especially if you needed to say like lightning bolt your opponent a couple times to like whittle them down before you grape shot them for 10 or something.
Yeah.
But my plan is to basically get in some chip damage. Maybe if I know that the game is getting to this point, like lightning bolt them and then be able to do some stuff where I like breach, play some baubles, lightning bolt, grape shot you for exactsies or whatever. But if you wanted to get like the grape shot number higher, I do think that you could play an offer you can't refuse. But he said it straight up cost him the top 8 because it wasn't a spell pierce. So, you know, obviously like that card has risks too. But yeah, I think that there are ways you can go harder on it. But if you are looking at it like in the games that you're racing that are close, that could come down to like, I need to actually win the game this turn versus potentially give my opponent an untap step, because Modern is a powerful format, and you know, like creativity can do the same thing, right? It's like you give them a chance to untap the creativity for 3 and just like drain you for a bunch, like possibly kill you, right? It's like there are just some matchups where you need to close the door, and I think that hammers or rhinos is one of them, because you're basically fighting like tempo deck against tempo deck, where you know they're getting in for trample damage. They have like some burn spells to finish you off and everything. It's just like kind of dangerous, and then burn is sort of like that as well. It's a little trickier because most games that you're winning are because you've killed early stuff and have had some counter magic to keep your life total relatively high. It's like rarely coming down to just an actual race. So I would probably be fine cutting the grape shot there. And then Omnath is one of the matchups where I do think you need to do something that's a little bit powerful off of breach, but I also think that grape shot is not necessarily it, because they can potentially just like pad their life total enough if things are going sort of poorly for you. So if Omnath is ever a massive problem, I might start looking into things like more Thought Scours and then just like playing a Thassa's Oracle instead, because like a lot of the games where you grape shot kill people for a reasonable amount, you could also probably Thassa's Oracle kill them. And then those situations, maybe you need the offer you can't refuse to be able to generate enough mana to do that stuff. But like sometimes it's just like you have a channeler, you play a breach, you play like another channeler out of the graveyard, you just bobble mill yourself until your deck is mostly gone. So
yeah, seems very reasonable. Anything else you want to say about the main deck? I want to make sure we talk a little bit about the sideboard before we wrap up here.
Yeah, 2 counterspell, 2 pierce is a little weird. It's like I want some permission because there's just some things that you need to deal with on the stack. Cascade is definitely among them. Having some counter spells for even just things like Murktide Regent or whatever that are not necessarily like game ending, but are kind of problematic. Like I do think that it matters, but like you can also build the deck in a different way, where instead of like this deck is trying to like be a little bit controlling and play like longer games, you could build it more in line with the prowess decks and like just try and kill people instead. And I think that's a fine plan. It's just a little more narrow than I would want. So the other thing that kind of sold me on Counterspell is like looking at the amulet list, they're not playing a lot of caverns.
Interesting. Do you think that's just a commentary on what the format is about right now?
I don't know. I feel like people just always did that. They're always like, I'm going to play 1 cavern main and like more in the board. But especially when Murktide is one of the biggest decks, I don't really like that. And they have a lot of lands in their decks, like 33, 34. And a lot of those slots are being taken up by things like Mycosynth Gardens. And I don't know, just like stuff like Boseiju, and you have like the Saga package, the Valakut package. Like they're all just these new packages where it's like
it's a lot of good lands now.
Yeah, so they're just like, I'll just like cut back on caverns or whatever, and I'm just like over here like, you know, drooling like, yes, please cut all your caverns. And I saw some lists that just like didn't have any main deck, and that just seems kind of silly to me.
Yeah, it feels like you're always supposed to have that one, right, and let you at least think about playing the game in that fashion.
Yeah, I mean, having one matters more if you're playing against a slower deck, like a blue-white control deck, where you have time to like Teleria West for it or whatever, and you don't necessarily have that time against actual Murktide. So I kind of wanted to create like a similar scenario against them, where it's like I want to put pressure on them. I want to actually have Counterspell to keep them honest, and then I talked about like not wanting to play Remand to facilitate Gigantha. Like the other reason I want to not play Gigantha is because I have stuff like Subtlety in the sideboard, which I'm scared of Amulet. You know, like I think that Subtlety is like really important to being able to beat them. And at that point, you can't play Gigantha really anyway because I'm bringing Subtlety in a decent amount of places. So
yep.
Anyway.
Yeah, I see the value of Subtlety in this format for sure. Why don't we move on to the sideboard? Yep. And again, I'll just read it. 2 Blood Moon, 2 Subtlety, 2 Flusterstorm, 2 Soul Guide Lantern, 2 Engineered Explosives, 2 Dress Downs, then 1 Vapor Snag, 1 Abrade, 1 Minor Misstep. What's the best way to talk about sideboard? You just want to kind of give the general theory on what you're trying to achieve in post-board games, how each of these cards plays into those plans?
Yeah, I can do that. If you wanted to basically lock up your Murktide matchup, play the 1 Vapor Snag main deck, because you're basically doing the same thing, and because you have some amount of counter magic on your own and enough like threatening cards, you're gonna be able to resolve a breach at some point, and it's whether or not your breach is better than whatever threats they have assembled at that point. And generally, if they have a Murktide, it's hard to actually beat the Murktide straight up. So you have to like kill your opponent or present some flying blockers and hope they don't peel, or have a card that allows you to like answer the Murktide cleanly. And I think Vapor Snag is just that card. So like you'll get in these scenarios where you just like trade a bunch, they resolve a Murktide, you resolve a breach, and then you do a bunch of stuff, but also Vapor Snag their Murktide. And that requires you to find like the 1 copy of Vapor Snag in your 60 card deck or whatever. But I assure you at that point, you're through like 30 to 40 cards in your deck. So
yep, that makes sense.
If you have a Vapor Snag against them, it's very difficult to lose. And then they're going to bring in some very light amount of graveyard interaction, usually unlicensed Hearst, which is basically why I have an Abrade in the sideboard. I used to have a Shattering Spree also. But yeah, just try to keep the Hearst off the battlefield if you can. Sometimes a tall order, you know, but also like the Hearst is kind of like clunky and slow, you know, like especially with things like Thought Scour and DRC in the mix. When you're trying to set up a breach turn, sometimes Hearst just isn't even enough. But
not eating enough graveyard quickly enough.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, you know, you're going to have like 10 plus cards and you cast breach and they have a Hearst and they're going to get to remove some stuff, but it's probably things that you have like redundant copies of anyway. So whatever. The other thing is just knowing when you should be like maybe keeping a Bauble in play. I think that matters a decent amount against Graveyard Hate in general for being able to like re-enable Delirium or just making sure you have one in your graveyard for a breach later or something. So like those kind of weird things come up sometimes too.
That's cool. That's the level of like depth to this deck that really draws me to want to play it. Like it has that old school legacy feel to me.
Yeah, no, it definitely does. Blood Moon, I started with Magus of the Moon because I basically like I think that Blood Moon is generally stronger. It's like harder to remove, and there are some instances where Magus is actually the more difficult card to remove because people maybe load up on answers to Blood Moon, but just like don't have ways to necessarily kill a creature. And I was looking at some of the decks, and Amulet has access to a lot of Besagus, so I was like, maybe Magus is better against them. But like a lot of them also just have a bunch of copies of Dismember in the sideboard, and then Magus is it's definitely worse against Omnath just because they will have a small amount of like lightning bolts, but also Fury and stuff like Solitude and stuff. So Blood Moon is going to be better against Omnath decks, and it's going to be slightly worse against Amulet, but I think that overall Blood Moon is going to give you better results. Like I started with Magus and just to try it, and it was fine, but it was more scary to me to just be like banking on a Magus than on a Blood Moon. And then again,
I understand that
against things like Hammer or just any of the Saga decks, it's just like it doesn't really matter a lot of the time. Usually you just like save the Blood Moon for when you can kill a Saga with it, and if it dies, it dies. Who cares?
Yep.
Subtlety is for the matchups where your deck that is like average CMC 1.2 or whatever actually needs some 0 mana interaction because they're like a little too fast. And that's stuff like Amulet, stuff like Burn, but Subtlety in games where you're going longer can also be pretty good. So against stuff like the Omnath decks or occasionally in the mirrors too. And it gives you like another sort of like backdoor way to stop Murktide Regent, and again is another flyer which matters in that matchup. And
Scam, another place where you're bringing it in, which I just think Subtlety seems quite good to me in the format right now. Like it is lining up very well against the strategies that are being employed.
No, it is for sure. You just need a way to rebuild after that, and Murktide can do that because they have, you know, cantrips and Ragavan and iteration and stuff, but like Breach is just like the ultimate refill. Yep. So
easy mode rebuild.
I'm also kind of interested in a deck that could just be like Subtlety, Fury, most of the other, you know, similar stuff, but then like Breach just to like draw 5 and refill. But the kind of the problem with that is then like a lot of your interaction is the stuff that you can't play from the graveyard with Breach. So it gets kind of awkward. So I haven't really gone down that route, but like I am interested in like Subtlety as Force of Will and then Breach as Ancestral Recall. I think that could be potentially pretty powerful.
Sounds like a good place to be.
Flusterstorm just for Cascade and for Counter Wars in Is It Mirrors, basically. Also have a copy of Minor Misstep, which could be third Flusterstorm, could honestly be a lot of things. And I on its face, Minor Misstep trades even or down on mana, so I don't necessarily like it, but against Cascade, it does trade up on mana, right? Because they're generally paying 3 for their thing, and you counter them outright. And then there's this weirdness with the Murktide matchup where, given the prevalence of mirror matches and stuff, they have started to play like 1 or 2 copies of Spell Snare, and it is not impossible to Flusterstorm a Spell Snare, but it is much easier to Minor Misstep a Spell Snare. So
that it is. Yep.
Minor Misstep is a Flusterstorm in mirrors that doesn't hit iteration all the time. Like, I mean, Flusterstorm doesn't hit iteration all the time. Minor Misstep doesn't hit it at all, but like it's always going to hit Spell Snare and like whatever 1 mana cards you want it to, and then it has like the added versatility of being able to like stop a Ragavan or whatever if you need to. So it's a little bit versatile. I think like the 2-1 split makes sense, but yeah, there are definitely going to be matchups where it's like this Misstep is just a worse Flusterstorm, and I get that. But then there's also spots against Amulet where it's like you can misstep an Amulet or a Summoner's Pact, whereas Flusterstorm is just not even a card you can bring in against them. And like, yes, it is a thing that you can do. Does that mean that you should be doing it? Is Minor Misstep a card you absolutely should be siding in against Amulet? I'm undecided on that. Currently, I am bringing it in, but like you definitely don't have to.
Okay. I mean, like the flexibility in plans, big part of the appeal, right? Like you're able to adjust as, you know, based on how your opponent's built, how your opponent's playing the matchup. I think having those kind of options available to you, almost always good when you're playing these style of like small ball Izzet decks.
Yeah. Dress down mainly for Urza Saga could be a copy main, which I think a lot of people have done in their Izzet decks, basically to save a sideboard slot. I started there also, but I wanted the 20th land. I wanted to have 2 Thought Scours. I wanted 7 1-drop removal spells. I wanted 4 pieces of permission. So it was just like
I sure don't see the cut looking at the list. Like it seems very hard for me to find a way to get that in main.
I settled on an Unholy Heat or a land, and I was not happy with either of those. So I was just like, look, can I get everything I want out of my sideboard and still, you know, have this other dress down in the board? And I think the answer is yes. 2 Engineer Explosives also for Saga tokens, but also like a lot of the decks that play Saga just have a lot of stuff that Explosives is good against. So Explosives, very good against Hammer, very good against Rhinos. If you expect a ton of Rhinos, their Explosives is definitely pretty powerful. I would recommend playing that.
I never expect any rhinos, so I don't have to worry about that. I'm always shocked whenever rhinos does well.
Yeah,
Probably
I
will
mean,
be till the end of time.
it does well in the challenges. It seems like every other week it like wins a tournament or whatever. So people are still out there doing their thing, and I would much rather, like, if I expect that deck to show up, you have the tools to beat it. The reason it wins is when people skimp on
Don't
those
respect
tools.
it. Yep, absolutely.
Soul Guide Lantern instead of Hearst. I think that this is kind of a big deal because I actually don't care about Hearst in the mirror because I'm not necessarily trying to stop Murktide Regent in that way.
All right, hold on. I have to stop you here because I argue with Janelle about this all the time. Are you saying Hearst or Hearst?
Hearst.
Okay. Do you think you occasionally say Hearst?
Probably.
Or am I just hearing it?
Probably.
Okay.
Unlicensed Hearst. Like, I don't know. SE does kind of like make the T sound, which is probably like how it started.
I think our mouths like want to push us in that direction.
Just like ending things with like an S sound where it's not pluralized is also weird, you know? Like Hearst.
Yeah, it is.
Purse. I guess we don't say it like pursed, but yeah.
Yeah, I bet there's someone out there who says it that way. I could see that being a common mistake.
My pursed.
Yeah.
That man stole my pursed. My unlicensed pursed. Yeah, I probably say I'm trying to say hearse, like, and just, you know, cut it off there. I know that is correct, but
okay.
Any objections?
It's so rare that I get to be the one correcting someone's pronunciation that I really have to take advantage of it. So
dude,
I'm
by
happy
all
to
means.
move on now.
Do you have any objections to like me cutting hearse in general?
I don't like for basically exactly the reasons you're describing. Like if I was trying to, deal with something like Dredge, then I would be like, okay, yeah, you probably want to commit to Hearst at this point. But I think given how these games are playing out, Soul Guide Lantern makes perfect sense. You don't want that sort of small ball ticky-tacky type effect. You need something a little bit bigger like this.
Yeah, and against something like Dredge, I would rather have Soul Guide Lantern.
I think they're better against playing against things like Soul Guide. Like good Dredge players are better against playing like your 2 of Soul Guide Lantern than they are against something like Hearst, which is just like this persistent annoying thing. But that's really besides the point, because my point is you don't have to account for either. So given what you are accounting for, I think I like Soul Guide. Here's
the thing though, is Hearst costs 2, right? Soul Guide Lantern, I know what you're saying, where it's just like, yeah, you get their graveyard once, they're pretty good at rebuilding. You have Breach to replay the Soul Guide Lantern.
Well, that's fair, yeah.
That's why. You create like these pseudo soft locks against them, which Hearst probably lets them, go through a bunch of cards, maybe get some amount of battlefield presence, and then, you have like this thing that is persistently kind of annoying them, but they've probably done enough that you don't actually care, whereas Lantern comes down early enough to where it matters, and then you can just keep doing it on like subsequent turns.
Okay.
So that's why I like that. And I've even considered like Tormod script, but like the fact that this can cantrip in some of those scenarios against decks that are like soft graveyardy, like the Rakdos decks, for example. It's like I want some amount of graveyard interaction against them to prevent like a grief from coming back or whatever. And they do their thing quickly enough generally that I want it to be 0 or 1 mana, but also in longer games, like maybe you don't need this effect and you just want it to cantrip. So I think Lantern is actually good.
Dude, love me an old school Relic of Progenitus Tormod script split. That was a feature of like all of my Is It Delver decks for a very long time.
Yeah.
And even more reason to explore it in this context, I think.
Yeah, and Relic would be great, except for the fact that you love your graveyard.
You lose your shit, yeah.
But yeah, I could see one Tormod script, one Soul Guide Lantern. I think that would be fine. I just am much happier with Lantern and the versatility or whatever. But there are also going to be metagames where, given that you don't care about Murktide Regent in that way, that you just don't play Graveyard Hate at all, and maybe that's where you get some of your other slots from.
Mm-hmm.
And I would only do that if I thought that I had a good Rakdos matchup already. This is just another thing that helps solidify that.
Yep, makes sense.
And then Minor Misstep can also come in against them, whereas like maybe Flusterstorm can't. So that's another spot for that. And then
Yeah, a little extra value.
yeah, a braid is just extra lightning bolt against basically red 1-drop creatures and to kill a hearse out of Murktide. And then yeah, that's kind of it. That's the sideboard. I feel like you're not over sideboarding in any matchups. The cards you're bringing in are pretty impactful, and it covers you against basically everything. Trying to go through the list here. I guess like some lists are playing in Emrakul because of Mill, and I could see that, but kind of how you were just like, well, no one plays Rhinos or whatever. I'm just like, well, no one plays Mill, except they do. You know, like you go through the challenges, there's always like 1 or 2 in top 32. So
yep, yeah, that's fair. I'm willing to take my losses to them. So be it.
I'm not though, man. Like especially a deck like this, you're trying to win a tournament, like it's 1 slot for a thing that could be like 5% of the metagame or whatever, and it's not bad. I do think that if you can afford to pay that opportunity cost, that you probably should. You know, it's like it's how you win these big tournaments.
But I mean, you never feel like you can reliably pay that, right? Like this goes back to the argument we've had for almost 2 years now, maybe longer, about like Giganta and sideboards, where like I am just like, I will always pay that cost. I always want the Giganta. I think it's worth it. And you're very big on that 1 sideboard slot is worth a ton.
It is a ton because you get to do stuff like play an Emrakul that like beats a matchup almost straight up, you know?
I guess that would be my question is like, do you think it actually wins you that matchup? Because for the most part, they do account for things like Emrakul being in sideboards, right?
They try, yeah. But it helps so much for you having to do very little. It's not like, oh, I have to like draw my sideboard card and resolve it and have it work out in this situation or whatever. It's just like, no, it's there. It's there and giving you turns. And I think especially with how the matchup is set up where they can mill you a decent amount and like, you know, you have Underworld Breach and things like Grape Shot to actually like kill them. It is a big problem for them because they can't just like do their thing and not have to worry about it. Because if they are just like doing their thing and you Emrakul them and then they start trying to like mill you out again because now they found like a surgical or something.
Oh, they're done for it.
Yeah, just like, all right, well now you're definitely lights out, right?
Yeah, it does put them they have to embrace a weird tension is what I'll say about the possibility of Emrakul. But maybe they almost have to embrace it anyway. Like just the fact that the card exists does a lot to actually slow down their play. And like there are prescribed decks that are more likely to have it, and maybe you can leverage that in some ways.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely less than a coin flip that they do have it, especially the Murktide ones, because stuff like Murktide Region is just like randomly very expensive, right?
Yeah.
So, I don't think that they necessarily need to prepare for it against Izzet, but when Izzet shows you Underworld Breach and they're trying to leverage that, I think whatever graveyard hate that they have should be coming in anyway. So it's not like they have to work super hard. It's like they just need to have like a lantern before they do some stuff, and you know, maybe that's enough, but like you're kind of doing some counterplay stuff with that by like pressuring them with things that care about the graveyard, and like you have your Abrade and some counter magic and stuff. So it matters. I don't know. Giganta I do think would matter in this deck, but like I said, I just like the subtleties and
subtlety seems excellent.
And the
I would make that
more.
same decision right now. Yeah. And
it's not like the matchups where you would bring in subtlety are the ones where it's like, oh, I would really like Giganta. You know, that's not true against 100% of matchups. Like against Amulet, you don't care about Giganta. Against Omnath, you probably do because the games will go long enough or whatever. And any game that does go long enough, having just the extra piece of cardboard, even for like Ledger Shredder or just to cast it, it does matter. And I've like there are definitely decks where I like Giganta more, and I'm more on board with it being there, and some where I just wouldn't cut it at all. I think like the Omnath decks in Pioneer, for example, is just like, no, like that's a good Giganta deck. But this one you can take or leave it, you know, and I'm fine with it. It's just like, do I get more from this Giganta or more from Counterspell and Subtlety? And given that like the bad matchups are the ones where I want Counterspell and Subtlety, it's like, hell yeah, I'm taking the UU cards every day.
very easy to see why you gravitated towards this deck. There is a massive amount of customizability and like small tweaks that you have for optimization purposes available to you.
Yeah, and I'm not done. I don't think that this is necessarily the final form, and certainly a lot of this stuff should get changed week to week.
Yep. Yeah, that's cool.
But I got a friend playing it in a PTQ this weekend, I think, and we'll see how he does. I kind of got the wind taken out of my sails when my stuff didn't show up, so I haven't been like looking at the PTQ schedule or anything, but I would like to play this at some point.
Yeah, keep us posted. You gonna put your sideboard guide up on the Patreon? Do we still have a Patreon? I feel like we do.
We do. I posted this list here kind of apropos of nothing a couple weeks ago, just because I was working on a bunch of deck lists and had some stuff that I liked. So I was like, I'm just gonna, put this out there. We haven't really been talking about it, but maybe this will benefit some people. And the sideboard guide I was working on when I was planning on going to the tournament and my friend was going to play. But as you can see from what I sent you, it is not finished, So like this is all as of a week ago or whatever. And I haven't really come back to it again. Wind out of sales, right? But if I do finish it, I'll throw it up for sure. But I don't want to put up like this half finished thing.
Fair enough.
What else? Any other cues that I can give you A's for?
No, I think you did a good job going through my cues. I mean, you certainly did an excellent job of selling me on the deck. It calls out to a lot of my preferences as a Magic player. So that's probably a pretty easy sale to make in the first place. But like I said, I think it's a cool little piece of deck building. And if you think about it, like kind of an archetype that Modern's always been a little desperate for, and it's done a better job. Like obviously this is in the range of Murktide in a lot of ways.
It is, yeah.
But to me, it feels closer to a Delver deck than like the other Murktide decks. And that has always been something that people wanted in Modern. Like whether it made sense for it to exist or not, people really, really wanted it to be a thing. And as Ragavan came out, it sort of became like the new Delver, and Ragavan takes the place of, Delver in these quote unquote Delver decks, which never have Delver, nor should they. But I think this is probably about as close as we've gotten in a very long time to a pure Delver deck in the Modern format.
Yeah, I think so too. And this is, I don't know, like one of those weird Delver Doomsday matchups in Legacy or whatever, where it's just like you're a Delver deck that has that aspect going on for it for sure, and like that is a prominent part of your game plan. But then you're also threatening something much larger that people also have to account for, because they can go after the Delver stuff, load up on spot removal, but you'll just get breached out one way or another. Either I'm drawing a bunch of cards or just killing you outright. So
I know it's a weird analogy, but it is almost like Dreadhorde Arcanist Delver, like in that fashion where, yes, you are under like the tempo pressure of the Delvers. And yes, Arcanist is not like, huge output the way Underworld Breach was. But if you stuck an Arcanist across 2 turns and like Brainstorm Lightning Bolt, you absolutely were getting that kind of card advantage from that sort of persistent source, the way Underworld Breach functions as well. And it like isn't quite a combo kill, but sometimes it felt like it when you were playing full powered Arcanist Delver. So I see a lot of similarities to that deck as well.
Yeah, and I mean that's basically like what Ragavan offers to these archetypes too, is that like it is that cheap threat, but it also just facilitates you, getting card advantage and like building up your mana and stuff like that. And it's just like, oh yeah, this is pretty unfair for a lot of different reasons.
Yeah, this deck in general has some of the most messed up Magic cards of the past however many years, like Ragavan, DRC, Mishra's Bauble, Expressive Iteration, Underworld Breach. They would all be very near the top of my like mistakes list over the past like 5 or so years.
I mean, Unholy Heat too is just like a card that makes it so it doesn't have to like splash or whatever.
Yep.
It kills everything that you care about for the most part. And there are lists that splash for things like Prismatic Ending or whatever, because, you do want to be able to interact with random enchantments and whatnot. But it's just like, Heat kills most of the stuff. And then instead of worrying about whether or not you can actually remove those permanents, you just like have a bunch of different ways to kill your opponent instead. But otherwise, maybe, things like Tarmogoyf could rise up or whatever and just be like a huge enough problem to the point where it's like, well, now I guess I have to like splash black for Terminator Dreadbore or something. And you just don't have to do that anymore. Just clean, lean is it. And it's just awesome.
That it is.
If anyone picks up this deck and plays it, this weekend, next weekend, whatever, definitely let me know how it goes. Especially if you do well. If you do poorly, maybe don't. But
don't message me in that case. I'm only talking to winners here.
No, I do want to hear about it. It's just like with a deck like this, the problem when it's just like, here's a deck list, here's a sideboarding guide, is someone might pick it up, and because they are not familiar with sequencing focused decks, things like Delver, you just end up making like a bunch of minor mistakes that like cost you games. So it's just like, yeah, I did badly with the deck, and it's like, well, you don't have any experience playing stuff like this. Like, that is not that surprising. This is not necessarily a deck that sheer power level can just like carry you through. Like, there are definitely things like Ragavan and Breach, but like a lot of the games are going to be close. It is going to come down to sort of the stuff that I was talking about earlier, where it's like, yeah, you have to like float a bauble in play, and you have to like sequence your cards in the right order, and you have to sideboard correctly because you can't have like too many clunky cards in this matchup or whatever. It's the stuff that I love because it kind of forces me to do everything correctly. And if I don't, I get punished for it. And I don't think that that's necessarily the Magic that everyone wants to be playing. And I definitely get that. So like, I wouldn't expect to just like pick up this deck because Gerry says it's very good and immediately crush with it. Like, definitely try and get your reps in with you can.
I would. And I'm actually being serious. Like, I would expect to just pick this up and do very well, just because it is exactly in my wheelhouse. Yeah. So if you are like me and you're very comfortable in these spots, I do think you can just pick this up and do very well.
There are the people of the world like Matt Costa, Dave Shields, who I always think about, where you just put like any sort of tempo deck in their hands.
Yep, they'll be fine.
And yeah, they just get it. They know it because I think it is just programmed into them to some degree, but also like they just have all the reps over all the years and they get it. They know when to speed up, when to slow down. After like playing a game of a matchup, they will know what they need to be doing at all points, basically.
Yep. I think it's like within range for me to play my first like one or two matches pretty poorly, but like by the end of the tournament, I'm good. Like I'm just in the right place. And I think it's like you said, it's just, there's so many similarities across now decades of playing this style of deck where it just makes sense.
Yeah. And if there was one piece of advice I could give for people who are like somewhat familiar, even if you've just played like Murktide to some degree, is maybe just do some gold fishing to the point where you get to like an Underworld Breach turn and make sure that you are just familiar with the amount of things that you're capable of doing on those turns. And that was the thing that was maybe the most beneficial for me, because it's like the first time you sit down, you like cast a Breach with like 4 mana open and a couple cards in your hand and like, 10, 12 cards in your graveyard or whatever. It's like, okay, what am I trying to do here? Because the flow chart is basically unlimited, right? It's like, I could play out like some Ragavans and DRCs, or I could just like draw a bunch of cards. Like, is it reasonable for me to like try and kill my opponent? Am I going to have like enough lightning bolts and enough cards and whatever? So just do that a couple of times until you sort of get a feel for like, all right, this is a scenario where I just want to bobble a bunch and make sure that I have some amount of like follow-up card drawer to find like the next Breach or whatever. Or yeah, let's go for the kill this turn because I think we're, like an 80% favorite or something. Or just like, yeah, play a Ragavan and consider a bauble and like just keep playing the game.
Very cool. Love having those options.
Yeah, but gotta be familiar with them. Anyway, thank you everyone for sitting through this rant. I always feel weird about doing like deep dives on stuff through podcast medium when it feels like a visual medium might be more appropriate, but I love this stuff and I like this deck a lot and I think it's doing a lot of good stuff. So good luck. Thanks for allowing me to go very, very deep on this stuff. This is my favorite, and I haven't done this in a while. But yeah, game.
Yeah, I mean, if you're gonna let me talk about dumps for hours on end, I'm pretty sure I have to let you talk about Magic decks.
Well,
so fair trade off.
I have to actually have put in the work, and this time I put in the work. So
happy to tap into that.
Game for real.
Good luck.